I think another big problem around SOPs is understanding what ties to better outcomes in that evolution of a process. Some teams can approach it from like, oh, this is QA, this is compliance, like you didn't follow the process, that deviation is bad.
Right.
But I think in some of the more forward-thinking organizations and the ones that are really gearing up for scale, they look at those deviations as actually like improvements. So it's not just like, okay, you didn't follow it, that's wrong. It's actually, oh, have we found a better way? That outcomes focus, I think, is something that people miss.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Podium Stories. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Ken. He's the co-founder of Tango Technology. Ken, thank you so much for being here, man. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I obviously have done some research, and before we go into the origin story of Tango and what it led you to get here, I'd love for you to give us some context on Tango. For the audience that doesn't know what Tango does, can you give us the 60-second elevator pitch that you give to an investor for that audience?
Yeah, totally. I could probably do it in less. So Tango's a Chrome extension that helps you create documentation as you work. So if you think about what you used to do, grabbing screenshots, saving them to your desktop, copying URLs, and then afterwards kind of writing up descriptions, we do that as you're working. And so the end result is really a beautiful step-by-step guide that then can live in Tango, or you can put it in your knowledge base, whether you use Notion, Coda, Confluence, Almanac. We play well with all of those, and so really just saving people time creating documentation.
I love that. And how does Ken get to build such a specific targeted company and Chrome extension? What led you to get here? Give us a bit of the background of your origin story that eventually drove you to starting this company.
Yeah, so I met my co-founders, Brian and Dan, when we were at Harvard Business School during our first year in the fall of 2019. And we sort of rallied around this theme of, let's call it team performance, and how you basically up-level teams, how you leverage your highest performers and help people ramp up, help people get better. And what we realized that a big barrier on teams is really just like this fluidity of knowledge. How do you take what a high performer does, extract that, give it to everybody else? And the solution today in many organizations is, oh, let's build up a knowledge base, or let's have someone record a bunch of looms. And we felt that there was enough of a barrier there for people to do that you weren't actually capturing all the knowledge, because it was like, I have to create this article, then I have to maintain it. When it gets out of date, people are going to ask me questions. Wouldn't it be just so much easier if I could, do this in the flow of my own work and quickly share out a link? And so, that's what really inspired us. In the middle of us like thinking about this idea, obviously the pandemic hit in the spring of 2020. And that really accelerated, not really our product development, but accelerated this pain point for a lot of our customers, where they're like, oh my gosh, my team's gone distributed. We actually, had to lay people off. So knowledge has now like escaped our company. And, teaching people process knowledge or how to do things has become impossible. You can't just tap someone on the shoulder. And so that for us was really like a call to action to say, okay, we have to go build this thing
right now.
Yeah, right now. And so we actually left Harvard Business School, sort of, I guess, dropped out. I don't know if you can drop out of graduate school, but dropped out and started Tango full time.
I love that. Yeah, it's an interesting feeling when something as horrible as the pandemic is beneficial for your business. We had a very similar stuff for our content marketing agency, because obviously you don't want the pandemic to be a thing, but then at that point, everybody wants to do more content. And it's a weird mixed emotion feeling. I wonder, when you went to Harvard, was the idea to become an entrepreneur eventually, or was it something that you were like, oh, now I have to do this, but it was not on the roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, I came into school, knowing that I wanted to either be part of a founding team or start a company or join something early stage. Uh, I had spent most of my career at Uber in the Bay Area, saw
Mhm.
the tremendous growth from 2014 when I was there to 2018 when I left, um, and all the phases of that company, and was just really energized by the entrepreneurial spirit that existed there.
Right.
And so when I left Uber, I actually went to Atomic, an incubator where I was able to work hands-on on a 0 to 1 idea. I mean, we didn't even get to one. They eventually took it there, but it was very much zero in its infancy. And so that taught me a lot of the skills and allowed me to kind of dip my toe in the water and say, hey, this is absolutely something I want to do. And going into school with that mindset, I think definitely helped me focus a little bit
Right.
more. But I would say more than anything, meeting Brian and Dan and realizing kind of our shared passion, like that was more of a catalyst.
I see. And I want to ask you about this as well. When you meet Brian and Dan at Harvard, what's the process of turning those friendships into business partnerships? And I wonder if there's been any challenges with that.
Yeah.
But it has to be an interesting of like, we're friends, let's go into business together. How was that process and transition?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's a process per se. I think it was just something where, we started off as friends, got to know each other pretty well. And, as friends do, you share your ambitions, you share your experiences, goals, hopes, dreams. And there was just a lot of alignment. It was something where I think we were all kind of looking in the mirror at each other. And we enjoyed each other's company enough that we were like, you know what, let's go all in. So it sort of happened organically, which I think is the best way. I think when you're out there kind of like specifically looking, okay, I need a technical co-founder, or I need someone on the biz dev side, like you lose a little bit of that early relationship building that we continue to lean on.
I love that. When you guys decided to kind of start working towards Tango, I'm guessing as you do market research, as you kind of study the problem, what are some of the mistakes that companies you've seen make when they think about SOPs and documenting their processes? Because I know that as companies want to scale, this is the key part, but it's something that most founders and CEOs are also not used to. So I wonder what are some of the main red flags or the main issues and challenges that you've seen companies struggle with?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a few things. And I'll just break it into kind of three. One is, and this is probably the biggest one. This is around like documentation staleness. So when we went out and asked people about their SOPs and documentation, we said, hey, how old does something have to be for you to be like, I don't know if I can trust this. This might be out of date. And from some people, we heard like 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Right.
Like if
Wow.
something in Confluence hadn't been touched for that long, it's probably out of date. So these rapidly growing organizations, the knowledge is evolving. And I saw that at Uber too. Like our best practices in the fall might not be what we could use in the spring,
Right.
And so I think that was one big problem. I think another big problem around SOPs is understanding what ties to better outcomes. So, and maybe I'll take a step back from this one, but in that evolution of a process, some teams can approach it from like, oh, this is QA, this is compliance, like you didn't follow the process, that deviation is bad. But I think in some of the more forward-thinking organizations and the ones that are really gearing up for scale, they look at those deviations as actually like improvements. So it's not just like, okay, you didn't follow it, that's wrong. It's actually, oh, have we found a better way? And so that outcomes focus, I think, is something that people miss. And then the last piece is really around ownership and maintenance. The way that knowledge bases and systems are set up today, you create the article, you're the one who owns it, you have to maintain it, you become kind of the support rep for that article or that process. And so that that is almost like a high mental barrier for people. And so, what we focused on with our product as well was, if we can lower the barrier to creating it, the actual act of creating it so low that everyone feels an ability to contribute, you're distributing some of that load as well. I mean, admittedly, we haven't perfected that, but we see that in organizations. And a lot of times when the companies grow, what they end up doing is like, they hire someone who's like knowledge-based manager or technical writer to absorb a lot of that pain. And, we've worked with those folks too. And there's a whole new set of challenges that brings up.
Right. I love that. It seems we always talk about the culture of the organization as a whole, but it seems like there's also a smaller culture within documentation and processes within its organization, right? Like you were talking about, if there's a deviation, is it automatically negative versus positive? It seems like that's a culture thing of breaking the process can be potentially good, and ownership within the process is also part of the organization. It seems like those are some values of a culture within that process organization.
Yeah. I think it's just a different mindset. I think companies probably reach a point where they say, all right, now we have to write everything down.
Right.
And it's kind of this huge effort where they say, okay, we did it, so it's done, like stamp of approval, like let's never do this again. or you have this mindset of like, hey, we're constantly, chasing our understanding of the business. I think that latter mindset is what leads to more success too, is just knowing what you don't know, admitting that, knowing that things are going to change, that you're going to improve, and that everything is kind of an ongoing experiment. I think that culture is one that can be really successful. And those are the teams that have really embraced Tango too.
I love that. And you mentioned the updating SOPs. As a founder, we run a bootstrap company. This was one of the challenges initially, right? Because we started getting to like 3-4 employees, and I was like, I have all this institutionalized knowledge that I've kept to myself, and I need to kind of write it down. And I did that for a week, and then 3 months later, I was like, I need to do it. I need to update these things. But I wonder, how can Tango help with the updating part, right? Obviously, like the homepage of Tango, as I was doing research, is very based on creating those guides. Is updating something that you guys are also having in mind, and something that you guys also want to help this organization do?
Yeah, it's on the roadmap, and it's definitely forward thinking for us, but I guess kind of the 2 steps to get there. One is actually building out kind of a robust viewer experience, one where, it's not just about who's creating documentation, it's also about who's trying to replicate it, who's trying to process that information. And so being able to do that is actually going to give us an understanding of, are people able to replicate it? You can imagine a world in our extension where, you pull up a workflow that might be relevant to you, you try to execute against it, and then, maybe you miss some steps, or there's some deviations like we talked about earlier. That might mean, hey, this process is evolving when you make those changes, or, you need to kind of refresh yourself and understand how to do it. And so that gets at what we talked about earlier. And that's going to help us keep things fresh, knowing that a workflow can be executed against. And then the longer term vision is one where, because we are creating documentation by accessing the DOM, so accessing, what actions you're taking on your computer, put simply, and the HTML and the CSS of different pages. There is a world where we think that we can actually update documentation for you.
Wow.
It's a bigger technical challenge. It's going to take a lot more effort and resources, but it's something that we get excited about internally, because then that staleness problem, that goes away.
Right. And this goes into, how do you think about like product roadmap within Tango, right? Because there's so many ideas and potential opportunities that you guys can expand from here. How do you think about prioritization, and what can we do today versus what we'd be so excited to do, but it might be too much of a technical challenge. Like how do you think about what's the next step, short term, mid term, long term are?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, even the stuff that I, just mentioned there on kind of the longer term vision, we still need to validate that, right?
Right.
I think when we think about prioritization, it really comes down to how do we narrow in our focus on the right customer, and what does that customer need?
Right.
One of the inherent challenges of a product like this is that there's a ton of horizontal use cases. A lot of people need to create documentation, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that in the adoption, which is really encouraging. But picking kind of a lane and saying, okay, this is who we're building for. This is who's going to determine what we need to build in the product. That's really how we think about prioritization. And for us, that's operations teams. So we mean, sales enablement, customer success, customer support, at scaling companies where sort of this knowledge overload is impacting performance, and kind of honing in on those people and saying, in order for you to use this weekly, daily, multiple times a day, what does it need to do for you?
Right.
And there will be spillover effects to other personas as well, which we care about those personas too, but the challenge of a resource constrained early stage startup is how do you focus?
I love that. Yeah, that's very interesting. And something I wanted to ask you, because this is the first time I think on the podcast we have somebody, the product right now is a Google Chrome extension. And I was wondering what are some of the marketing strategies or challenges or differences that comes with marketing for a Google Chrome extension. I also wonder if that's initially what you thought would be the best way to like kind of reach the most people and make their life easier. What was the thinking on that, and how does that affect your marketing?
Yeah, well, when we thought about a Chrome extension, you really have to put it into the context of your own product. So think about Grammarly, Honey, Loom. These are some of LastPass. These are some of the most popular Chrome extensions in the world. And what do they all do? They sit on top of what you're doing in the browser. So it's a layer on top. And so when we sort of recognize that common theme, Loom is recording your screen, LastPass is filling in fields, Grammarly's, adjusting your writing or, giving you tips. Honey's giving you deals based on the sites that you're on. It's very similar with Tango. You're creating documentation based on the tools that you're using. So we're a layer on top. And so, having an experience that was fairly frictionless, where it could, the tool can live in your browser. You can still do all the other stuff that you're doing, but it's just right there when you need it. That was the right distribution for us, as opposed to, making someone download a desktop application or making someone live out of our web app. We needed it to be passive. So that was a big learning. I think, it's also very easy to add a Chrome extension, easy to remove as well. So, that low friction adoption has been great for us because, people can come in, they can try it, add it to their browser. It doesn't feel like they're, overwhelming their typical workflow. But at the same time, if you're not proving value to someone, it's really easy to get rid of a Chrome extension. So these are things that, we think about ongoing, beyond kind of the strategy of like, do we build a Chrome extension? It's, those are things you have to think about.
I like that. Yeah, it seems like it's helpful in distribution, and then it puts you to test whether you're adding value or not very quickly, right? Because I've downloaded extensions and deleted them 15 minutes later, right? Like I tried it, I'm like, oh, I don't see it, I'm out. Yeah. So it seems like it puts that to test very quickly, which can be a good thing and a challenging thing. It's very interesting to see that. I want to kind of move to a bit of a different topic. I read an article of yours about the values that supercharge Tango, where you also talk about how your experience at Uber gave you an insight into how values can work, but you also mentioned that some of the values there could get weaponized. I was wondering if you could expand on that and how that experience at Uber is helping you shape the values now at Tango?
Yeah, totally. So, I think if you're watching the Showtime show, Super Pumped, it'll eventually get to our values reveal that we had. But we had 14 values, and I think the intentions were good in distributing those, but the way that we manifested a lot of those values at Tango was performance reviews in meetings, a lot of like delivering like one-on-one feedback, and there's one in particular that myself and some of my former colleagues at Uber, we always laugh about, which was principled confrontation. And the idea there was that, again, these can be reframed in so many ways, but the idea was, if you disagree with something, push back, like have a healthy debate. I think the way that lives in Tango's values is we say question assumptions. Assumptions are made, they're not final. We want everyone to discuss them, but even just the way you phrase the value. So Uber was principled confrontation. It gave license to people to be super aggressive
Right.
in their discussions, right? They'd be like, well, principled confrontation. And then, in any functioning work environment, you're not going to have, and you don't want everyone who falls in this aggressive archetype. So, people whose style was more to sit back and listen, process, maybe take some time and then come up with a viewpoint. They weren't incentivized in the right way either, because then during performance reviews, they'd say, oh, you're not exhibiting principled confrontation, which, in a lot of ways just meant speaking up loudly in a meeting, with almost like a hot take. Right. And so that was some of the challenge that we saw at Uber. And so, when I worked with, my founding team, as well as the rest of the team, the team had a lot of input in these values too. What we thought about was, how do we make sure that not just the intentions are good, but the implementation of them are also good. It wasn't something where not, a value could be weaponized or, used to like kind of steer how you work in a way that wasn't positive for the team. So values are, I kind of view them as like an ongoing exercise. I won't say that ours are perfect, but we thought a lot about, that experience that I had at Uber in formulating those.
I love that. And I think of values, one of the biggest challenges I see with values is a similar value, a challenge that I see with SOPs, that sometimes they get written and then they put on a desk and then it's never looked at ever again. Right. I was wondering, what are some of the things that you guys kind of do, or maybe that you saw at Uber that allows the values to be alive and continue to be present in everyone's mind, and they're not just shelved and forgotten until the next yearly performance review or something like that?
Yeah, totally. Well, there's a few things that we do, and I think the three that are most important, we create space during our all hands meeting every week to highlight a value, talk about it, and recognize people for that. Nice. So we kind of do like a kudos round robin, if you will.
Yeah.
Another one is the values are part of our hiring process. And so, when we're evaluating candidates, you can't just say something, broad and generic. You actually have to tie it back to the values and how they've demonstrated those values in their past experiences. So that's a great one. And then, the last piece on values is we actually have the team do sort of weekly updates. We're distributed, fully remote, a lot of asynchronous work. So at the beginning of the week, the team submits updates, and a lot of those updates touch on some of the values that we have. What's a customer quote that you latched onto this past week? That ties to our delight the customer value. What's something where that someone on the team that you want to recognize, sort of in addition to that, all hands kudos. So we try to talk about the values as much as we can, and tie those to core processes like within the team.
I like that. This is one of the challenges I've had in my agency, and we've struggled with it. And so I'm going to use a couple of those things for sure. Final question, Ken, because I know we're coming to the top of the hour. I read an article about the hockey goalie that kind of inspired you. I know I'm coming here from the backlog of articles, but we do our research in this podcast. I'm a big sports fan. Your story kind of reminded me of soccer goalie, because I'm from Spain, called Iker Casillas, which kind of had the same attributes. Without getting too deep, I was wondering how that goalie, seeing him kind of perform at that level, kind of has inspired what you guys do right now in terms of performance and your mindset when it comes to business as well.
Yeah, for those who don't know the reference and are listening, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, during the 90s and early 2000s, and Dominic Hasek, who's arguably the best goaltender of all time in the NHL, played for the Buffalo Sabres during that time. And so I got a firsthand glimpse. Right. He was my favorite player. I had the jersey, met him a couple times. But I think what was so powerful about the way he played was not just his stats, which were exceptional. I mean, he had, I think he won 6 Vezina trophies, which is given to the best goalie in the league annually. But the way he did it was so unorthodox, is how everyone described it. I think there's a MasterCard ad featuring him, that basically talked about his style as being priceless, because it was just so unique, and no one could replicate it. And the way he did it was, kind of pushed conventional thinking around how to play the position. Very similar to how like Steph Curry revolutionized the NBA. And so that for me always instilled this appreciation for not just getting results or having the stats, but also, the way that you did it, and, how you conducted it. And I think there's a lot of parallels to the workplace and what we're trying to do at Tango, where, yeah, you can drive results, but there's a delicacy and there's an art to the way you drive those results. And we want to make those visible.
Right.
And so, recognizing the unconventional, the unorthodox, finding inspiration in the how, that's something that we care a lot about.
I love that. I'll send you a link of my soccer goalie, because I think there's a lot of parallels.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. Ken, I know we're coming to the end of the time. I appreciate you so much for being here. For everybody listening, we're going to put Tango's website, we're going to put Ken's LinkedIn on the comments. Please check that out. I think I'm going to download Tango today. I think it's a great thing that they're doing. Ken, again, appreciate you coming on the podcast. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For everybody listening, thank you for your attention. We'll see you next time.